Hello again, Ben Emet. This is from 2019 and it's called Everything and Nothing, a Review Part 1. This is, I think, about the cosmos, astrophysics or something like that. It's a 3-part series. Well, I have 3 parts of it anyway. I'll try and read them all in one go. Notwithstanding the fact that this docu-series is dealing with what are in truth deeply philosophical questions, running them through the gauntlet of scientific inquiry should deduct from the mythological nature of the narrative rather than add to it as this series does. In short, the primary value of the show is not only to demonstrate what science doesn't know, but also to show they will remove the ingredients list and side effects of believing in such things in order to sell their product. So they have learned their lessons well from the pharmaceutical industry. Tell your customers sweet little lies and they will buy like crazy. Fortunately, this quasi-science propaganda product won't give you cancer, like blood thinners, or won't give your kids autisms, like some other preventative medicine products, which we can't name here because of YouTube's censorship policy. But it will try to convince you that science is a unified belief system without internal conflict. Nothing could be further from the truth. Big Bang, which the show implies is the absolute gospel truth, is but one idea among others of the godless origins of the universe. In any case, apart from the clumsy attempts to inoculate the audience against the staggering questions posed in the show, they remain rarefied and apart from the casing in which they are presented here, and thus for the discerning viewer, opening up an exciting world of questions which, as with all questions, can be run through the biblical filter. This is part 2, Everything and Nothing. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. That is biblically unequivocal. The question now is, does the heavens in this case refer to the space in which celestial bodies exist, or to the celestial bodies themselves? And if the former, does the space mean the vacuum of the void, or an intangible supernatural medium in which special properties of the void can function? Just checking my time there. Regardless, afterward God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This means light exists independently of light-emitting objects, which means that we don't really know what light is. What is this kind of light? God separates this light from darkness, and then there is morning. Then there was evening, one day. Everything, a place to put biological organisms, now exists, once the earth is further prepared, that is. Land, vegetation, and ecosystem, all laid down before humanity is created. Even the sun, moon, and stars serve terrestrial purpose, marking the times and seasons and providing illumination. But as it turns out, these functions didn't necessarily require the earth to be centralized within this awesome celestial clockwork mechanism. Rather, we sit on the edge of our galaxy, gazing out upon what seems to be an expanse of an empty nothingness capable of destroying all life, interspersed with violently radioactive energy generators capable of destroying all things. Indeed, such is the chaotic power observed within the heavens, it would seem the great celestial clockwork is beginning to grind its own gears into a sure and certain obliteration. And if the biblical timeline of a few thousand years is true, rather than the billions of years assigned by the conventional science, it probably doesn't have more than 1,000 or 2,000 years of existence left. Like humanity itself, the absence of a life-extending element is absent, and renewal on both a cellular and cosmic level is not being fully and completely achieved. Perhaps in God's original design, the tree of life would not just renew human beings, but also flow out somehow into the universe to make interstellar travel both possible and necessary. Which brings us to the point where we can consider whether the space in which things exist has the built-in capacity to facilitate faster than light travel. Useless as it would be in a universe that will destroy all life attempting to pass through it now, perhaps once it would have enabled ever living beings to populate other stable worlds, which of course are now being ground up and destroyed by a dying universe. But nonetheless, the corpses of these planets and solar systems still remain. So within the realm of space, the nature of gravity and the calculations designed to understand and describe it seem to indicate a malleable media which might be coerced by an as yet undiscovered technology to allow us to bend it in such a way as to allow us to transcend the vast distances of space. But of course, the one thing that isn't considered is whether or not this medium itself sits within something as yet undiscovered, which would mean that the everything we think we know is vastly smaller than the everything that actually is. As St. Paul writes, the seen came out of the unseen, and St. John adds that it will one day pass back into it when the stars fall from the sky. Part 3, Everything and Nothing. Kudos for this documentary series for attempting to address these things, and for scientists for trying to plainly and simply describe their beliefs. But at the end of the two shows, it's clear that the things that are discussed are just ideas. They are by no means definitive or absolute, despite the language of absolutism enjoyed by the scientists in the show. The minutiae of quantum physics still lacks the tools needed to examine it firsthand. Mathematics is great, but it's not direct observation. Nonetheless, we can at least suppose what the wavering of electrons in a vacuum mean, or the apparent creation and destruction of particles on a tiny scale might imply about the unseen realm from whence they come. Galactic maps, photos of the embryonic universe are present carte blanche. If indeed an intrepid scientist journeyed through the cold dark reaches of the early universe and snapped off a few shots on his iPhone, rather than saying, here is a mathematical model presented in picture form, an artist's impression of some popular ideas, as it were. Regardless of the story-like nature of the show and all the loss of detail that implies, some fantastic questions remain unanswered, despite the conclusions drawn at the documentary's close. Is there antimatter? Without a big bang, we don't have to try to imagine where things came from. God made them. That is simple. The question is, how did God do it? Scientists obliterate their chances of figuring these things out by trying desperately to erase God's creative power from their equations. Their livelihoods depend on such mental acrobatics, but we are under no obligation to follow in such calamitous footsteps. So we can plainly ask, when God brought the seen world out from the unseen, what exactly happened? I mean, we know God spoke things into existence, but to obey God's command, matter had to trace a presumably discoverable pathway. Can we find it? What would it reveal about our hollow universe? Who would have imagined that between the particles that God used to make up everything was the very nothing from which God drew the things to begin with? But that is what we see there. And moreover, this nothing itself is a veritable hive of activity from which scientists on the show like to see the blueprints for the totality for all that is. However, if the collision of matter and antimatter spontaneously erupting from the void mirrors the self-creation of the universe and the debris left over from such events, we have yet to learn how two obliterated particles can produce a third. Furthermore, the microwave energy left over from creation should not be so arbitrarily labeled and closed away in some imaginary imaginary zoo for matter. Rather, it should continue to exist in the world of unanswered questions along with quantum particles and their inexplicable behavior. But the need to seem to have solved the deepest mysteries of our age and separate us from previous generations, so seemingly lost in the inescapable miasma of ignorance, overrides all natural abilities of reasoning, and we are left with vain attempts to put the puzzle of a universe together well before all the pieces of it have been found. In conclusion, this was a great series which I highly recommend, but buyer beware, evolutionary propaganda underscores the narrative here, and clouds of the potential for genuine scientific inquiry to be born. And that's the end of our blogs. Just a couple of notes on that, if I can remember back. Firstly, there was a guy on YouTube, Christian scientist, astrophysicist, and he talks about the fact that the speed of light has not actually been measured one way, but only two ways. In other words, you bounce it off a mirror and you time it for when it comes back. And he postulates that actually it's possible that the one-way speed of light might be instantaneous, which actually makes a lot of sense. Of course, this is impossible to prove because you can't measure the one-way speed of light for some reason, and that's a reality in physics. So therefore, what is happening is when the light strikes a mirror, the mirror dissipates the energy to such a degree that it's left at what becomes the measurable speed of light, and it remains that speed of light as it bounces between that mirror, or at least it seems to remain at that speed. So you can imagine the full force of the energy of a light beam that has not been reflected of something, is what this guy's saying, is going to be entirely different than the speed of a light beam or a wave, the waves of light that have thus had their energy depleted by directly striking an object, even a mirror, because there's no such thing as a perfect mirror, of course, and it's still an object, and the light beam is still colliding with it. So, which of course means that if the speed of light is instantaneous, then all those stars we see out in the universe are communicating their present state of being to us rather than one from a long time ago. But of course, that would be very convenient from the biblical point of view, just as from the narrative of these scientists that believe in an super ancient universe. It's very convenient to believe that the reflected speed of light is the same as the one-way speed of light. So you see there's this reason for each to believe in his narrative over and above what the fundamental physical reality of these elements are. So no one is interested in this question who doesn't have a horse in the race. Okay. So what the reality is, basically, we have no way of saying. However, the narrative of science is going with the two-way speed of light as the one-way speed of light, basically. Is that scientific? No, of course not. But it's convenient. And the other thing is, can space be folded? Let me tell you something. Einstein's words don't really seem to fall to the ground. Let me put it that way. God really backs him up. So one way or another, it's going to be probably that Einstein will be proved true in his calculations, but not necessarily in the way that we would imagine. Okay, that's often the way of these things. Space is foldable. Not if it doesn't exist, if it's a nothingness, if it's just the emptiness with particles, and we're talking about the foldable parts of space being measurable particles that react to gravity, for example. For some reason, this concept is pretty hard to find in science. I'm running out of time here, so I can't really get into it, but it's easy to imagine an absolute nothing. We are capable of doing that. That has no properties in which things exist. Everything, basically. Beams of light, dust, ice, atoms, molecules. But underneath this is the unseen universe in which the supernatural world exists, which is not constrained by distance or time. Therefore, anything in that unseen universe can be at any part of the seen universe at any time, and God, of course, being what He is, can take physical objects from any part of the universe to any part of the universe. Alright? Anyway, so perhaps I'll get into that more in a later blog. But I hope you enjoyed these ones today, and God bless, and I'll see you another time.